بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه ورحمة عليه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى. الصلاة والسلام على أسعد خلقه وخاتم رسله محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه والتابعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ثم أما بعد. It's a warm welcome to all of you. I'm sorry we're starting a few minutes late. Just for the first time, but I'll start in time, inshallah, starting next time. It's such an important event, really, that you are all participating in, which is a start of a degree in Islamic studies that is not restricted to quote-unquote Islamic studies. So this is not a study of the history of Islam, even though we're going to talk about history for a number of hours. But this is a study of the reality of Islam through Islam. So at the end, of course, it is Islamic studies, and the degree is Islamic thought. But what this course is trying to answer is the question of how. How can I take an Islamic approach to the reality of the people? Remember, this is applied Islamic thought that you're getting a degree in, that is, as the description of the degree is saying, that is based on the Maqasid al-Sharia methodology. So how can Maqasid al-Sharia be a methodology? What is that? And what is the general strategy of that degree, of that course, so that you are approaching the issues that you are going to research in the right way. Hence the title of the course, Holistic Methodology and Strategic Approach. Methodology here is in the philosophical sense, not in the instrumental sense. You could study a course of methodology where you learn how to write footnotes and how to make references, and you learn a little bit of Microsoft Office, and how to do interviews and questionnaires, and so forth. This is methodology as an instrument. This course is not like that. This course is on methodology as in the approach, the philosophy, the values that you are going to embody as you embark on your course and your research. So, we have 9 lectures, and it's a bit crammed in 3 weeks. So inshallah, the next courses are going to be more relaxed. We stay much longer in Cape Town. But basically, the 3 weeks we divided the material on 9 lectures. And here is just a quick run on the lectures and the general outlook of the course before we get into the first lecture. The first lecture has to do with cycles of reflection, building the premises on the conclusion. So basically, the conclusion that you will get from this course is how I will start the course, based on the final picture that you will draw by looking at this course. And we learned this methodology from the Quran itself. When you start reading the Quran, you don't understand anything that you read for the first time until you get to the end of it. And then when you go to the beginning, you see, oh yeah, so towards the end, this is what this is about. And we call these, in this methodology, cycles of reflection. And these cycles of reflection on the Quran and Sunnah have a technique that, inshallah, we will learn how to cycle into the Quran and the Sunnah, and we'll discuss that in order to come up with the information that you need. The information that we will call here the framework of your study. So, as you do graduate studies, you need a framework, and we will discuss the elements of that framework so that you can do the study in the systematic way, and that all of us are on the same page when it comes to the approach of Islam, of studying Islam. There are a number of approaches, methodologies. There is a methodology of tradition in which you are approaching the reality in terms of the history. So you study the history very well, and then you try to project the history to the reality. That is an approach. And that is not the approach that we are taking in this degree, in its design and its courses. We're not studying history, we're studying the revelation. And the revelation is not part of history. The revelation is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent in his book, and what Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said. Yes, Muhammad was a man who lived in Arabia in the 1st century Hijri, but his talk is beyond geography and history. It's not just for Mecca or Medina, and it's not just for the 7th century CE, it's for every place and time. But this is a bit sophisticated. We need to see how what he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, is for every place and time. That is part of methodology. What the Quran is saying is also for every place and time. But how can we project the Quran on every place and time? How can I take the Quran and Sunnah and go and study a community here in one of the townships, as some of your colleagues already suggested for the research? How can we study the status quo of a community via the Quran and Sunnah? The question of how. How can we do that? Then the second lecture is on perceiving reality. Third lecture is on perceiving history. So before we move on with the methodology, we are going to look at two very important dimensions through the same methodology. The first dimension is reality. You really cannot do research before you understand reality. What is reality? It might seem like a simple question, but it is not. It is very tricky to look at reality, because you look at reality through what we will call here a conceptual framework or a composite framework. That composite framework involves a number of elements, and if you don't have the right framework, your judgment of the reality is going to be distorted. الحكم على الشيء فرع عن تصوره, as we say in the usul, which means that judging something is based on how you perceive it. So the perception of reality. Two, the perception of history. How did we get here as an ummah? The whole ummah of Islam, the whole ummah of humanity, the whole ummah of Muslims in South Africa, Cape Town, whatever it is, every event in the reality is based on a history. And how do you read history is also very important, because the reading of history is going to shape your deepest sense of identity. History and identity are quite intertwined, and language as well. Discuss language in a big deal and a lot of detail. And therefore, how to approach history? Well, we study Islam, Islamic studies. Let's discuss Islamic history. Islamic history needs to be rewritten through that methodology, and I will discuss that and describe what problems we have in our Islamic history that require rewriting, so that when we approach Islam in Africa, Islam in South Africa, then we approach it properly. If we approach Islam in South Africa through the seminal work of Islamic history, then we have no history, because it's not mentioned anywhere in the Tabari or Ibn Kathir or Ibn Khaldun or 20, 30 volumes, and only what is mentioned is Arabia and what's around Arabia. Islam in the Malays has a long history, but it's not studied. Islam in America actually has a long history. Now we're discovering more and more that even some of the Native Americans were Muslim. You see, nobody studied that. And it is very important. And actually Islam did not even start with Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now if you go back to the Wahi, Islam started with Adam, and Musa and Isa were Muslim prophets. And that is a different perception of history through the objectives of the studying of history that we will, inshallah, discuss in one lecture. And then once we are through with this, we will start to look at the fundamental theories of the maqasid methodology, or what you can call in Arabic, usul al-fiqh al-maqasid. Fiqh here is not in the fatwa sense. You are not going to be qualified to give fatwa in this program. You're going to be qualified to think about the institutions that give fatwa, or about the communities that need fatwa, or about the individual Muslim that might ask for fatwa. But the thought is different from the, if you wish, the edicts or the legal stuff. So this is not fiqh in that sense. It is fiqh in the Quranic sense, which is the wider. يتفقهوا في الدين ولينذروا قومهم إذا رجعوا إليهم لعلهم يحذرون. ذلك بأنهم قوم لا يفقهون. Fiqh is a Quranic concept. We discuss concept over half of the course. It's going to be about concepts. Fiqh is that concept that is wider than the legal theories. The legal theories are important, of course, and they have other programs to deal with. You could take a program in fiqh and usul, but this is in al-fikr al-Islami, or the Islamic thought. How can we approach today's economy, for example? That is a big question. There is a lot of fiqh there, of course, because there is halal and haram in economy. But the question is actually wider than the halal and haram, because it's also halal and haram, but in the wider sense. In the sense that, capitalism is haram and this kind of but you can't really oversimplify and say everything about capitalism is haram. It doesn't work like that. Then you have to sophisticate your approach. You have to have a composite framework, as we call it here. There are elements that we will agree with. There are elements that we will not agree with. There are elements that we will take as a darura, or if we don't agree with, we are harming ourselves. And there are elements that we need to build institutions in order to change. So this is a bigger question. It is not just the simple question of whether politics is haram or halal, or economics is haram. That doesn't work in that level of study. And inshallah, then we will look at the fundamental elements that we study from the revelation.